Savannah Mitchell, 27, stared at her parents across their pristine dining room table, unable to process the words that had just shattered her world. "It's better if you're not there," her mother had said about her only brother's wedding, while her father nodded in cold agreement. What they didn't realize was that this cruel exclusion would set in motion a chain of events that would expose decades of family secrets and ultimately bring their carefully constructed facade crumbling down. Hey everyone! Before I dive deeper into this family drama that completely changed my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. The support from this community has been incredible through my journey of healing and finding justice. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you've ever had to stand up to family who've betrayed your trust. Now let's get into how my own parents' betrayal led to the most unexpected form of family karma. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston, I always felt like I existed in my brother Connor's shadow. Our family dynamic was painfully clear. Connor was the golden child while I was the afterthought. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Mitchell, were respected figures in our community. Dad as a prominent corporate lawyer, and Mom as the perfect socialite wife who chaired every important charity committee. Our family projected the image of success and togetherness, but behind closed doors, the reality was starkly different. Connor could do no wrong. His mediocre grades were celebrated as if they were academic achievements, while my consistent place on the honor roll barely received acknowledgement. When he made the junior varsity basketball team, my parents attended every game, cheering loudly and hosting team dinners. Yet they found excuses to miss my debate competitions even when I qualified for nationals. "It's just not as exciting to watch as sports," my father once explained with a dismissive wave. As we grew older, the disparity became more pronounced. When Connor decided to attend our father's alma mater, despite his average grades, my parents pulled strings and made a substantial donation to ensure his acceptance. Meanwhile, when I earned a scholarship to an Ivy League school on my own merit, my mother's response was, "Well, I suppose that's nice, but it's not the family tradition." My accomplishments were treated as mild curiosities rather than sources of pride. The pattern continued into our adult lives. Connor followed in our father's footsteps, joining his law firm despite showing little aptitude for the profession. I pursued a career in environmental science, developing innovative sustainability solutions that eventually caught the attention of major corporations. Yet at family gatherings, all conversations revolved around Connor's cases and connections, while my work was reduced to Savannah's tree-hugging phase. When Connor started dating Melissa, the daughter of one of my father's golf buddies, my parents were ecstatic. She fit perfectly into their social circle, beautiful, from the right family, and willing to set aside her own ambitions to support Connor. They welcomed her with open arms, immediately treating her more like family than they ever treated me. I had been in a serious relationship with David for 3 years by then. David was brilliant, kind, and successful in his own right as a pediatric surgeon, but he came from a middle-class background and had worked his way through medical school. My parents barely acknowledged our relationship. When I brought him to family dinners, they asked superficial questions at best or ignored him completely at worst. My mother once whispered to me in the kitchen while David chatted with my distant cousins in the living room, "You could do better if you made more of an effort to meet the right kind of people." The disparity reached its peak when Connor proposed to Melissa after just 10 months of dating. My parents threw an extravagant engagement party at the country club, inviting everyone who was anyone in our social circle. I watched as they beamed with pride, introducing the happy couple to their friends as the future of the Mitchell legacy. That same week, David and I had shared news of our own engagement after 3 years of building a relationship based on mutual respect and love. When I called to tell my parents, my mother's response was tepid. "Oh, that's nice, dear. We're so busy with Connor's wedding plans, but maybe we can have you both over for dinner sometime next month to discuss it." The dinner never happened. Instead, every family conversation became consumed by elaborate plans for Connor and Melissa's wedding. The venue had been selected, the exclusive Rosecliff Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. The guest list included state senators, CEOs, and even a minor European royal my mother had befriended during a charity gala. No expense was being spared. Meanwhile, when I tentatively brought up my own wedding plans, my mother sighed. Honey, you know we can't possibly focus on 2 weddings at once. Connor's is in 6 months, and these things take priority. Maybe you should consider waiting until next year. The message was clear. My milestone was an inconvenience, while Connor's was the event of the season. I tried to maintain a relationship with my brother despite the obvious favoritism. We had occasionally found solidarity in our childhood, sharing eye rolls at our mother's social climbing or our father's pompous speeches. But as adults, Connor had fully embraced his golden child status, becoming increasingly condescending toward me and my choices. He seemed to genuinely believe he deserved the preferential treatment he received. It's just the way things are, Sav, he told me once after I confronted him about monopolizing our parents' attention at what was supposed to be my birthday dinner. Dad's grooming me to take over the firm someday. It's important family business. I had swallowed my hurt and anger for years, making excuses for their behavior and telling myself that family meant accepting people despite their flaws. David was the one who finally helped me see the situation clearly. This isn't about flaws, Savannah, he said gently one night after a particularly humiliating family dinner. This is about them not valuing you, and you deserve so much better. The embossed cream envelope arrived in my mailbox on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The Mitchell family crest was stamped in gold on the back flap, my father's addition to our family identity when he made partner at his law firm 20 years ago. Inside was Connor and Melissa's wedding invitation, as elaborate and excessive as I had expected, calligraphy on heavyweight cardstock, adorned with real pressed flowers and tied with silk ribbon. What I didn't expect was the handwritten note that fluttered out when I opened it. Savannah, please understand that your RSVP is just a formality. Given your history of making scenes at family events and your inappropriate relationship choices, we think it would be best if you didn't attend. We're sure you understand. Mom and Dad, I read the note 3 times, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Making scenes. My inappropriate relationship choices. The accusations were so divorced from reality that it felt like they were describing someone else entirely. I had always been the peacekeeper in our family, swallowing my own feelings to maintain harmony. And David was a pediatric surgeon who saved children's lives, for God's sake. My hands shaking, I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice dripping with artificial warmth, until she realized it was me. Oh, Savannah, did you get the invitation? Isn't it beautiful? The calligrapher did such a wonderful job. I got the invitation, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. And the note? There was a pause before she responded, her tone shifting to the condescending one she reserved for me. Well, good. Then we don't have to have an awkward conversation about it. Your father and I think it's for the best. Can you explain what you mean by making scenes? When have I ever caused a problem at a family event? She sighed dramatically. Don't be deliberately obtuse, Savannah. You know how you are. Remember Thanksgiving 3 years ago? I cast my mind back. Thanksgiving 3 years ago had been at my parents' house as usual. The only remotely controversial thing I recalled was gently suggesting that perhaps we could donate to the local food bank since we had so much abundance. My father had dismissed the idea as bleeding heart nonsense. All I did was suggest a charity donation, I said. You made everyone uncomfortable with your political agenda, my mother snapped. And then there was the Christmas when you brought up that ridiculous environmental project of yours during your father's toast. I remembered that, too. After my father's toast praising Connor's first 6 months at the firm I had mentioned receiving a grant for my research project, my father had quickly changed the subject and no one had acknowledged my achievement. That wasn't a scene, Mom. That was me trying to share good news. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she said with exasperation. You always have to make everything about you. Connor's wedding day should be about him and Melissa, not you and your issues. My chest tightened. And what about my inappropriate relationship choices? What exactly is inappropriate about David? There was a long pause before she answered. He's just not one of us, Savannah. He doesn't fit in with the family. Because he earned his position instead of having it handed to him. The words escaped before I could stop them. This attitude is precisely why we think it's better if you're not at the wedding, she said coldly. Your jealousy of your brother has always been so unbecoming. Jealousy. That was how they interpreted my desire for equal treatment, as petty jealousy of the golden child. I'm not jealous of Connor, I said. I just wanted you and Dad to be proud of me too. Of course we're proud of you, she said automatically, but without conviction. We just think it's best for everyone if you sit this one out. The Andersons will be there and you know how important they are to your father's business. We can't risk any unpleasantness. The implication was clear. I was a liability to their social standing. A potential embarrassment. The conversation ended shortly after, with my mother extracting a reluctant promise that I would think about what's best for the family. I sat in stunned silence after hanging up the invitation mocking me from the coffee table. David found me there an hour later when he returned from his hospital shift. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately alarmed by my tear-streaked face. Wordlessly, I handed him the invitation and the note. His expression darkened as he read it, jaw tightening with anger I rarely saw from my gentle partner. "This is beyond cruel," he said finally, "and completely unacceptable." "They've always favored Connor," I said, "but I never thought they'd go this far." David sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "Savannah, I've tried to be understanding about your family. I know how important they are to you despite how they treat you. But this crosses a line." He was right. Something had broken inside me, the last thread of hope that my parents might someday see my worth. In that moment, clarity washed over me. For years, I had been chasing their approval, making myself smaller to fit the role they had assigned me. I had accepted their dismissal of my accomplishments, their indifference to my happiness. No more. "I need to talk to Connor," I said, reaching for my phone. He may not always stand up for me, but surely even he would find this note appalling. But when I called my brother, his response stunned me further. "Look, Sav, Mom and Dad showed me what they wrote, and honestly, I agree with them." Connor said, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather rather than my exclusion from his wedding. "This day needs to be perfect. The guest list includes Dad's most important clients and some of Melissa's family friends who are practically American royalty. We can't risk any distractions." "Distractions," I echoed, disbelieving. "Is that what I am to you? A distraction?" "Don't be dramatic," he said, and I could practically hear him rolling his eyes. "It's one day. It's not like we're cutting you out of our lives." Except they had been doing exactly that for years, slice by slice, until I was barely visible in the family portrait. After hanging up with Connor, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to stop accepting the crumbs of affection they occasionally tossed my way. It was time to value myself if they wouldn't. "I'm not going to beg for a place at that wedding," I told David, "but I'm not going to slink away in shame either. They want me gone, fine. But they'll have to deal with the consequences of that choice." I didn't yet know what those consequences would be, but for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of power in my relationship with my family. They had shown their hand completely. There was no more pretending, no more hoping for change. And in that painful clarity, I found unexpected freedom. The week after receiving the wedding invitation, I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. My research team was finalizing a major report on sustainable urban development that could potentially reshape city planning policies nationwide. The project had been my focus for the past 2 years, and its completion should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, I found myself going through the motions, the joy of achievement hollowed out by my family's rejection. David noticed, of course. "You should take a break," he suggested one evening as I stared blankly at data analyses on my laptop. "Maybe visit your grandmother. She always cheers you up." Grandma Rose was my father's mother and, ironically, the only member of the Mitchell family who had ever shown me unconditional love. At 85, she still lived independently in the family's ancestral home outside Boston, stubbornly refusing my parents' suggestions that she move to a retirement community. "I'll leave this house feet first or not at all," she'd declare whenever the topic arose. Unlike my parents, Grandma Rose had always celebrated my achievements and supported my choices. She had attended every debate, competition, and graduation ceremony, beaming with pride. And she adored David, calling him a man of substance after their first meeting. "That's actually a good idea," I said, closing my laptop. "I'll call her tomorrow." When I reached Grandma Rose the next morning, her delight at my proposed visit was palpable. "Oh, wonderful. I've been feeling a bit under the weather lately, and your company is better than any medicine." Concerned, I asked if she needed me to bring anything, but she dismissed my worries with characteristic briskness. "Just your lovely self, dear. And perhaps a bottle of that Pinot Noir we enjoyed last time." I arrived at her historic Victorian home 2 days later, the familiar wraparound porch and gabled roof, a welcome sight after the 4-hour drive. Grandma Rose greeted me with a warm embrace, though I couldn't help noticing she seemed frailer than during my last visit 3 months ago. Her silver hair was perfectly styled as always, but her clothes hung more loosely on her frame. "Don't look at me like that," she chided, catching my concerned gaze. "I'm old, not dying. Now come help me with tea. I want to hear everything that's happening in your life." We settled in her sunroom, surrounded by thriving plants and photographs spanning generations. As I poured tea into her favorite bone china cups, I debated whether to tell her about the wedding situation. I didn't want to upset her or create tension between her and my father, but Grandma Rose had an uncanny ability to detect when I was hiding something. "Out with it," she said after observing me for a few minutes. "Something's troubling you, and it's written all over your face." Sighing, I handed her the note my parents had included with the wedding invitation. She read it silently, her expression growing increasingly stormy. "Well," she said, finally placing the note on the table between us with precision, "it seems my son and his wife have outdone themselves in poor judgment. They've always preferred Connor." I said, the familiar hurt resurfacing. "I've accepted that. But to explicitly uninvite me from my only brother's wedding." Grandma Rose reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "This isn't about preference, Savannah. This is cruelty, plain and simple. And it stops now." There was a steel in her voice I'd rarely heard, and it made me straighten in my chair. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering directly, she rose slowly. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." I followed her upstairs to what had once been my grandfather's study. The room remained largely unchanged since his death 15 years ago. Leather-bound books lining the walls, a massive oak desk dominating the center, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco still lingering in the air despite years of open windows. Grandma Rose went to the desk and unlocked the bottom right drawer with a small key she produced from her cardigan pocket. From inside, she withdrew a folder bound with faded red ribbon. "I've been debating for years whether to show you this," she said, her voice heavy with uncharacteristic hesitation. I've always hoped Richard would come to his senses on his own, that he'd recognize what a remarkable daughter he has. But after this, she gestured to the note downstairs. You deserve to know the truth. She placed the folder on the desk and untied the ribbon with careful fingers. Inside were legal documents, yellowed with age but still legible. My grandfather had been meticulous in his record-keeping. What is this? I asked, scanning the first page. The reason for everything, Grandma Rose answered simply. Read it carefully. The document was dated 30 years ago, 3 years before my birth, when Connor was just a toddler. It was a modified trust agreement, and as I read further, my confusion grew. I don't understand, I said, looking up at my grandmother. This says something about inheritance conditions. She nodded, her eyes sad but resolute. Your grandfather built the family fortune through his law practice, as you know. But he was concerned about Richard. My son was brilliant, but also entitled even then. Your grandfather worried that Richard might mismanage the family assets or become too focused on status rather than substance. She pointed to a specific paragraph. So he created this trust with conditions. The bulk of the family fortune would remain in trust until both of Richard's children reached the age of 30. At that point, if both children were deemed by the trustees to have received equal treatment and opportunities, the funds would be released to Richard's control. If not, the assets would be divided with half going directly to the child who had been treated unfairly. I stared at her, trying to process the implications. Are you saying, your father has never had full control of the family fortune? She confirmed. He's had access to the income generated by the trust, which is substantial but not the principal. The real wealth, the foundation of everything, has been held in trust all these years. And I'm one of the potential beneficiaries if my parents didn't treat us equally. The concept seemed almost absurd. You are. And as one of the trustees, along with your grandfather's former law partner, Harold Winters, I can tell you that the evidence of unequal treatment has been mounting for years. She reached into the folder and pulled out another newer-looking document. This is Harold's most recent assessment. It details dozens of instances of preferential treatment toward Connor, from educational opportunities to financial support to simple emotional acknowledgement. I flipped through the pages, a strange mix of vindication and sadness washing over me as I saw my life experiences clinically documented. The private tutors hired for Connor when he struggled academically, while I was told to figure it out when I needed help with advanced classes. The new car he received at 16, while I continued taking the bus until I could save enough from my after-school job to buy a used Honda. The lavish celebration for his law school acceptance compared to the perfunctory acknowledgement of my full-ride scholarship. Does Dad know about this assessment? I asked, my mouth dry. He knows about the trust conditions, of course. I reminded him regularly when you children were growing up. But he either didn't believe the trustees would actually enforce the terms, or he simply couldn't overcome his favoritism despite the financial consequences. Grandma Rose shook her head. Either way, he made his choice. And now, she said, straightening her shoulders, Connor turns 30 next month, shortly after his wedding. You're 27. The final assessment will happen after Connor's birthday, and the trustees will make their decision. My mind was reeling. So all this time, while they were favoring Connor, they were actually setting him up to lose half his inheritance. Your parents were setting themselves up to lose control. Grandma Rose corrected gently. Neither you nor Connor have done anything wrong in this scenario. This is about your parents' choices and their consequences. I sank into the leather chair behind the desk, overwhelmed by the revelation. Why are you showing me this now? My grandmother's expression softened. Because you deserve to know that their treatment of you was never about your worth, Savannah. It was their failing, not yours. And perhaps, she hesitated, Perhaps knowing might help you decide how to respond to this wedding situation. I looked again at the documents spread before me, evidence of a 3-decade family secret that had shaped my entire life without my knowledge. The hurt of my parents' rejection was still raw, but something else was emerging alongside it, a sense of clarity and perhaps even power. "What would you do?" I asked my grandmother, genuinely curious. She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I can't tell you that, my dear. But I can tell you that you have more options than you realized yesterday. And whatever you decide, I'll support you completely." As I helped her gather the documents and return them to their hiding place, a plan began forming in my mind. Not a plan for revenge exactly, but for truth. For finally stepping out of the shadows and claiming the place in my family I had always deserved, whether they welcomed me there or not. "Thank you, Grandma," I said, embracing her as we headed back downstairs. "I know exactly what I need to do now." I spent the weekend at Grandma Rose's poring over the trust documents and formulating my plan. The revelation about my family's financial dynamics had shifted the ground beneath my feet, but I was determined to find solid footing. This wasn't about money. I had built my own career and financial security without my parents' support. This was about dignity and truth. By Sunday evening, I had decided on my course of action. It would require careful timing, unwavering resolve, and the support of a few key allies. I explained my intentions to Grandma Rose as we shared a final cup of tea before my departure. "It's risky," she acknowledged, studying me over the rim of her teacup. "Your parents won't react well to being confronted this way." "I'm not looking for their approval anymore," I replied, surprised by how liberating those words felt. "I just want honesty. For once in our family history, I want the truth to be acknowledged." "Then you have my blessing," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "And more importantly, you have my faith. You've always been stronger than they gave you credit for." As I drove back to my apartment in the city, I called David and asked him to meet me at home. This plan would affect him too, and I needed his perspective before proceeding. He was waiting when I arrived, concern evident in his expression as I recounted everything I had learned at Grandma Rose's. When I outlined my intended response to the wedding exclusion, he listened without interruption, his face growing more serious with each detail. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when I finished. "Once you set this in motion, there's no going back. Your relationship with your parents might never recover." I considered his words carefully. "The relationship we have now isn't worth preserving," I said finally. "It's built on lies and conditional love. If confronting them destroys that, I'm prepared to lose it in hopes of building something more honest in its place, even if that honest thing is permanent estrangement." David nodded slowly. "Then I'm with you whatever happens." The next morning, I began implementing my plan. First, I needed professional assistance. I called Harold Winters, my grandfather's former law partner and co-trustee of the family trust. He agreed to meet me for lunch at a discreet restaurant downtown. Harold was in his 70s now, with a full head of silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened intently as I explained what I had learned and what I intended to do. "Your grandmother has been concerned about this situation for years," he said when I finished. "I'm relieved you finally know the truth." "The trust assessment, the documentation of unequal treatment," I said. "How comprehensive is it?" Harold's expression was grim. "Extremely. We've maintained detailed records since you were born. Financial disparities, educational opportunities, emotional support, it's all documented with dates, amounts, and witness statements where applicable. Would you be willing to provide me with copies of those records?" He studied me for a long moment. "This is about more than the money for you, isn't it?" "It always has been," I answered honestly. "I just want them to acknowledge what they've done, not only to me, but to Connor too. They've harmed both of us with this dynamic, just in different ways." Harold nodded, seeming satisfied with my response. "I'll have copies prepared for you by tomorrow. Use them wisely, Savannah." The next piece of my plan required reconnecting with someone from my past. Megan Johnson had been Connor's girlfriend during his senior year of college before he met Melissa. Their relationship had ended abruptly, with Connor claiming they had simply grown apart. But I had always suspected there was more to the story, particularly given how quickly he became involved with Melissa afterward. Locating Megan wasn't difficult. We had maintained casual contact through social media over the years. She was surprised to hear from me but agreed to meet for coffee the following day. "It's good to see you, Savannah," she said, as we settled at a corner table in a busy cafe. "Though I admit I'm curious about why you wanted to meet after all this time." I took a deep breath. "I need to ask you something about your breakup with Connor, and I'm hoping you'll be completely honest with me." Her smile faded, replaced by wariness. "That was 5 years ago. Why bring it up now?" "Because I'm trying to understand my family," I said simply. "And I think your experience might help fill in some important gaps." Megan was silent for a long moment, turning her coffee cup in small circles. "What do you want to know? Did my parents have anything to do with your breakup?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. Finally, Megan sighed. "I always wondered if you suspected," she said quietly. "Yes, they did. Your father offered me money to end things with Connor." Despite having anticipated this answer, hearing it confirmed sent a shock through me. "He paid you to break up with my brother." She nodded, looking ashamed. "I was graduating with massive student debt, and he offered to pay it off nearly $80, 000. All I had to do was end things with Connor and never tell him about the arrangement. And you accepted," I stated, not judging but seeking confirmation. "I did," she admitted. "It wasn't just about the money, though. That was a powerful incentive. Your father made it very clear that I would never be accepted into your family. He and your mother had already decided Connor would marry someone from their social circle." She paused. "Someone like Melissa." The pieces were falling into place. "Did they specifically mention Melissa?" Megan's laugh was bitter. "Your mother did. She said, 'The Anderson girl would be a much better match for Connor's future.'" I didn't know who she meant at the time, but when I saw the engagement announcement less than a year later, I put it together. I felt sick. Not only had my parents manipulated my life, but they had orchestrated Connor's as well. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything I said, and I may ask you to repeat it to others." By the time our coffee cups were empty, I had the full story. My parents had systematically undermined Megan's relationship with Connor, excluding her from family events, making disparaging comments about her background, and finally offering the financial payoff when subtler methods didn't work. Meanwhile, they had been cultivating the connection with the Andersons, ensuring Melissa was present at key social events where Connor would notice her. "I'm not proud of what I did," Megan said as we prepared to leave. "But maybe helping you now can make up for it a little." "Would you be willing to put all of this in writing?" I asked. "A sworn affidavit." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes. It's time the truth came out." With Harold's documentation and Megan's testimony secured, I moved to the next phase of my plan. I needed to understand exactly what was happening with the wedding, who was invited, what the schedule entailed, and most importantly, what role my parents were playing in the event. For this, I turned to an unlikely ally, Melissa's younger sister, Amber. Unlike her perfectly polished sibling, Amber had always been something of a rebel in the Anderson family. We had bonded at a few family gatherings over our shared discomfort with the rigid social expectations of our parents' world. I invited Amber to meet for drinks, framing it as a casual catch-up. She arrived at the upscale bar looking slightly suspicious. "I was surprised to hear from you," she said as we settled into a private booth. "Especially with the wedding drama." "So you know about that," I said, unsurprised. About your parents basically uninviting you. Yeah, it's the talk of both families. She shook her head. For what it's worth, I think it's complete bullshit. Her frankness was refreshing. Thanks. I think so too. Melissa doesn't know I'm meeting you, she confided, leaning forward. She's completely under your mother's thumb at this point. The wedding has become this monster of social climbing and networking. I barely recognize my sister anymore. That sounds like my mother's influence, I agreed. Which is actually why I wanted to talk to you. I need to understand exactly what's happening with this wedding. Amber raised an eyebrow. Are you planning to crash it or something? Not exactly, I said carefully. But I am planning to address some long-standing family issues, and the timing of the wedding is relevant. She studied me for a moment, then grinned. Whatever you're planning, I'm in. What do you need to know? Over the next hour, Amber filled me in on every detail of the upcoming nuptials. The rehearsal dinner would be held at the Newport Mansion on Friday night, with the ceremony scheduled for Saturday afternoon, followed by an extravagant reception. My parents had essentially taken over the planning, sidelining Melissa's mother and imposing their vision of the perfect society wedding. Your father's invited half the legal community in Boston, Amber reported. Plus, potential clients from New York and D.C. This is as much a business event as it is a wedding, and they're using my brother's marriage to advance my father's career, I concluded. The pattern was so clear. Now my parents didn't see us as children to love, but as assets to deploy for their own advancement. There's one more thing you should know, Amber added, hesitating slightly. Your father's making a major announcement at the rehearsal dinner, something about a new partnership or expansion of the firm. It's supposed to be this big surprise, but Melissa told me it's related to the Andersons' legal holdings somehow. This was the final piece I needed. My father was planning to use Connor's wedding to announce a business merger with the Anderson family, likely contingent on the marriage itself. The personal and professional were completely entangled in my parents' world. As I gathered the information for my plan, I felt a strange sense of calm. The hurt of being excluded from my brother's wedding had transformed into something else, a clear-eyed determination to expose the truth, whatever the consequences might be. Hey everyone, this story is taking some unexpected twists, isn't it? I'm curious. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew? If you're enjoying this journey of family drama and justice, please hit that like button to help others find this video. I promise the next part is where things really get intense. Now let's continue with what happened after I discovered my parents' manipulation went far beyond what I could have imagined. 3 days before Connor's wedding, I requested a meeting with my parents. The formal nature of my request, an email rather than a phone call suggesting a neutral location rather than their home, clearly caught them off guard. My father's assistant called to confirm her tone, suggesting they were both puzzled and slightly annoyed by my approach. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell can meet you at Venezia at 7 p.m. tomorrow, she informed me. They've instructed me to tell you they only have an hour, as they have wedding preparations to attend to. Venezia was an upscale Italian restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor, a place my parents frequented for business meetings rather than family dinners. The choice was deliberate on my part. I wanted neutral territory with witnesses, not the privacy of their home where they controlled the environment. That will be sufficient, I replied. Please tell them I'll see them then. I spent that night and the next day preparing. I organized Harold's documentation, chronologically highlighting the most egregious examples of favoritism. I added Megan's affidavit and the information from Amber about the business merger disguised as a wedding. Finally, I included copies of the trust documents themselves with the relevant sections highlighted. All of this went into a sleek portfolio that looked like any business presentation my father might prepare. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the tools and appearances they valued to dismantle the facade they had spent decades constructing. David offered to accompany me to the meeting, but I declined. This confrontation needed to be between me and my parents without the added complication of their dismissiveness toward my partner. "Are you sure?" he asked as he helped me into my coat. "I don't like the idea of you facing them alone." I smiled at his concern. I'm not alone anymore. That's what's giving me the strength to do this. I arrived at Venezia 15 minutes early, giving me time to select the perfect table visible enough to discourage any dramatic outbursts from my parents, but private enough for our conversation to remain confidential. I ordered a glass of Pinot Noir to steady my nerves and waited. My parents arrived precisely at 7 p.m., my father checking his watch, as if to verify they weren't wasting a single unnecessary minute on me. They were impeccably dressed, as always my mother, in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. My father in a tailored suit that screamed old money and influence. Savannah, my mother, greeted me with an air kiss near my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. I hope this is important. We have the florist coming to the house at 9. It is I, assured her, gesturing for them to sit. Thank you for making the time. My father signaled for the waiter immediately. Macallan 18 neat, he ordered, then looked expectantly at my mother. Sparkling water with lime, she said, then turned to me with a practiced smile. Now what's this about, dear? If it's about the wedding, I thought we made ourselves clear. Crystal clear, I agreed, taking a sip of my wine. But this meeting isn't to beg for an invitation. My father frowned. Then, what exactly are we doing here? We're extremely busy with final arrangements. I'm aware, I said, placing my portfolio on the table between us. The wedding of the year combining two of Boston's most prominent families. It must be quite the undertaking. Something in my tone made my mother look at me more sharply. You seem different. I am different, I acknowledged. I recently came into some information that has changed my perspective considerably. My father's drink arrived, and he took a measured sip before responding. What information? Instead of answering directly, I opened the portfolio and slid a document across the table. I believe you're familiar with this. He glanced down, and I saw the exact moment recognition dawned. His face paled slightly, and he quickly pulled the paper closer to prevent my mother from seeing it. Where did you get this? He demanded, his voice low and tense. From Grandma Rose, I said simply. She thought it was time I understood the family dynamics a bit better. What is it, Richard? My mother tried to peek at the document, but my father folded it quickly. Nothing important, he said dismissively. Just some old family business. It's the Mitchell Family Trust, I informed her. The one that stipulates equal treatment of both children as a condition for my parents to receive control of the family fortune. My mother's perfectly maintained composure slipped for a moment. That's private family business. I'm family, I reminded her. At least biologically, if not emotionally. My father leaned forward, his expression darkening. Whatever game you're playing, Savannah, it won't work. That trust is administered by your grandmother and Harold Winters, not by you. I'm not playing a game, I said calmly. I'm simply informing you that I know about the trust and its conditions. I also know about this. I slid another document forward, the detailed assessment of unequal treatment that Harold had provided. My father's face flushed with anger as he skimmed the contents. This is outrageous! You have no right. I have every right, I interrupted, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through me. This is my life, documented here. My childhood, the opportunities I was denied, the support that was withheld, all while Connor received everything. My mother reached for the document, scanning it with increasingly distressed eyes. This is simply Harold's interpretation, she protested. It's biased and incomplete. It's meticulously documented, I countered. Every instance, every dollar, every decision. And it's not just about the money. It's about the fact that you systematically favored Connor while making me feel like an outsider in my own family. We never, my mother began, but I cut her off. You explicitly uninvited me from my only brother's wedding, I reminded her. If that doesn't demonstrate your true feelings, I don't know what does. My father took another drink, his mind clearly working rapidly behind his calculating eyes. What exactly do you want, Savannah money? Is that what this is about? The question was so predictable, so in character, that I almost laughed. No, Dad. If I wanted money, I could simply wait for Connor's 30th birthday next month, when the trust conditions will be evaluated. Based on this documentation, I think we all know how that assessment will turn out. The implication hung in the air between us. My father's jaw tightened as he understood my meaning. If the trustees determined that Connor and I had not received equal treatment, which the evidence overwhelmingly suggested half of the family fortune would come directly to me, bypassing my parents entirely, then what my mother demanded, her composure cracking further. Why are you doing this? I want acknowledgement, I said simply. I want you both to admit what you've done, not just to me, but to Connor as well. What we've done to Connor. My father scoffed. We've given him everything. Exactly, I agreed. You've denied him the chance to build his own identity, to earn his own achievements. And you've manipulated his personal life in ways he doesn't even realize. I pulled out Megan's affidavit next, including paying off his college girlfriend to break up with him so he would marry the daughter of a family that could advance your business interests. My mother gasped, looking quickly around to ensure no one had heard. That's a lie. It's a sworn statement, I corrected her, tapping the notary seal at the bottom of the document. Megan has nothing to lose by telling the truth now. The statute of limitations on any potential claims has expired, and she's moved on with her life. But she was quite detailed about your involvement in engineering her breakup with Connor and your not-so-subtle nudging toward Melissa. My father's expression had gone from anger to calculation. He was assessing damage, considering angles just as he would in a difficult legal case. What do you plan to do with this information, he asked finally. That depends on you, I replied. I'm not interested in destroying our family contrary to what you might believe. What I want is simple, a private acknowledgement from both of you about what you've done and a public reinstatement of my invitation to Connor's wedding. After all this, my mother gestured to the documents spread across the table. You expect us to welcome you to the wedding? I expect you to do what's right for once, I said firmly. Not because it advances your interests, but because it's the decent thing to do. My father was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the table as he considered his options. And if we refuse, I met his gaze steadily. Then I'll attend the rehearsal dinner anyway, as Harold Winters is +1. He's invited, of course, as your father's former partner and a family friend. And during your big announcement about the merger with Anderson Legal Holdings, I'll make a different announcement. About the trust, about Megan, about everything. The color drained from both their faces. My father's carefully planned business coup would be ruined if the truth about his manipulation of Connor's personal life came to light during the very event meant to celebrate the union of the two families. You wouldn't, my mother whispered. It would devastate Connor. It would devastate your plans, I corrected her. Connor deserves to know the truth about the family he's so desperate to please. He deserves to know that his relationship with Melissa was orchestrated from the beginning. That's not my father, began, then stopped himself, reconsidering. Connor and Melissa love each other. Whatever happened with Megan is irrelevant now. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said. If their love is genuine, learning about your manipulation won't change that. But they should have the choice to make their commitment based on truth, not lies. The three of us sat in tense silence for several minutes, the weight of decades of family dysfunction pressing down on us. Finally, my father sighed deeply. You'll be invited to the wedding, he conceded, his voice tight. I'll have Eleanor call you tomorrow with the details. And the acknowledgement I pressed. He grimaced as if the words physically pained him. We may have shown favoritism toward Connor over the years. It wasn't intentional, but looking back, I can see how it appeared that way. It was the barest minimum of an admission wrapped in qualifications and excuses. But it was also the first time in my life my father had acknowledged any wrongdoing toward me. Mother, I prompted, turning to her. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with her napkin, careful not to smudge her mascara. We wanted the best for both our children, she said, her voice wavering slightly. But perhaps we didn't always know what that meant for you, Savannah. You were always so different from us. Again, it was far from a full acknowledgement, but it was a crack in the facade. I decided to accept it for now. Thank you for that, I said quietly. I'll expect the wedding details tomorrow, and I hope this can be the beginning of a more honest relationship for all of us. As I gathered the documents and prepared to leave, my father reached out to touch my arm, the first voluntary contact he had initiated in years. You're more like me than I realized, he said, his tone a complex mixture of respect and regret. I never saw it before. I wasn't sure if his words were meant as a compliment or an observation, but I simply nodded and walked away, my heart pounding with the realization that for the first time in my life, I had forced my parents to truly see me. The formal invitation to Connor and Melissa's wedding arrived by courier the following day, along with a handwritten note from my mother that could best be described as cordially stiff. The note acknowledged my attendance at both the rehearsal dinner and the ceremony, with pointed reminders about appropriate attire and behavior. I had expected nothing less. My parents had conceded defeat, but they would maintain appearances at all costs. David was skeptical when I told him about the confrontation and its outcome. Do you really think they'll honor their word, or are they just buying time to figure out a countermove? Oh, they're definitely planning a countermove, I said, examining the thick cream invitation with its gold embossing. But they know I have leverage they can't overcome easily, and appearances matter too much to them to risk a public scene. So, what's our next step, he asked, unconsciously using our in a way my family never had, including me automatically in his thinking. Now we prepare for the wedding, I said. But there's one more person I need to talk to first. The next morning, I called Connor and asked to meet him for coffee. He seemed surprised but agreed, suggesting a cafe near his office downtown. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table checking emails on his phone with the distracted air of someone with too many obligations and too little time. Sav, he greeted me, glancing up briefly. I hear you're coming to the wedding after all. Mom and Dad didn't explain what changed their minds. I helped them gain some perspective, I said, settling into the chair across from him. But that's not why I wanted to meet. He put his phone down, giving me his full attention for perhaps the first time in years. What's going on? You seem different somehow. It was the same observation my mother had made, and it gave me a small surge of satisfaction. I had spent so long trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable, that my newfound confidence was immediately apparent to those who were used to overlooking me. Connor, there's something you need to know before you get married, I began carefully. It's about Mom and Dad, and about your relationship with Melissa. His expression immediately hardened. If you're here to cause problems, I'm here because you're my brother, I interrupted. And despite everything, I care about your happiness. He looked skeptical, but gestured for me to continue. I had debated for hours about how much to tell him. The full truth might devastate him days before his wedding, but anything less felt like perpetuating the family pattern of lies and manipulation. In the end, I had decided on honesty delivered as gently as possible. Do you remember Megan Johnson from college? I asked. His expression softened slightly. Of course. My girlfriend, senior year. What about her? Did you ever wonder why she broke up with you so suddenly? Connor shrugged, but I caught a flicker of old pain in his eyes. She said she needed space, that we wanted different things. Pretty standard breakup stuff. Why are you bringing this up now? I took a deep breath. Because it wasn't her choice, Connor. Mom and Dad paid off her student loans to end things with you. For a moment, he just stared at me, processing. Then he laughed, but it was hollow. That's ridiculous. Why would they do that? Because they had already decided Melissa was a better match for their plans, I said quietly. The Andersons have legal holdings that Dad has wanted to merge with for years. Your marriage is the social connection that makes the business merger possible. Connor's face flushed. You're saying they— What? Arranged my marriage like some medieval nobility. They created the circumstances, I clarified. They made sure Megan was out of the picture, then put you and Melissa in the same social situations repeatedly until nature took its course. That's insane, he protested, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. I love Melissa. We chose each other. I'm not saying you don't love her, I assured him. I'm saying Mom and Dad manipulated the circumstances that brought you together. What you've built since then is between you and Melissa. Connor ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. How do you know all this? Where is this coming from suddenly? In response, I pulled out a copy of Megan's affidavit, not the original, which remained securely with my attorney, but enough to make the point. Connor read it slowly, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally a resigned sort of recognition. This sounds like them, he admitted, finally pushing the document back toward me. The calculated approach, the focus on appearances and connections. But why are you telling me this now, days before my wedding? Because you deserve to know the truth, I said simply. What you do with it is entirely your decision. If you truly love Melissa and want to marry her, nothing has to change. But you should make that choice with full awareness, not as part of Mom and Dad's master plan. Connor was quiet for a long moment, staring into his untouched coffee. They've always controlled everything, he said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper. My education, my career, apparently even my relationships. I knew it on some level, but it was easier to go along with it. He looked up at me, really seeing me. How did you do it? How did you resist them for so long? The question caught me off guard. I didn't think of it as resistance, I said after a moment's reflection. I just couldn't be who they wanted me to be, no matter how hard I tried. Eventually, I stopped trying. I envied that about you, he admitted, surprising me further. You always seemed so sure of yourself, even when they disapproved. I almost laughed at the irony all those years. I had envied his secure position as the favorite while he had envied my independence. We've never really talked, have we? Not about the important things. No, he agreed sadly. We haven't. It's not too late to start, I offered, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly, the first such gesture between us in years. Whatever you decide about the wedding, I want you to know I'm here. As your sister, not as an adversary. Connor nodded slowly, then looked at me with new resolve. I need to talk to Melissa. She deserves to know about this too before we make vows based on a foundation that might not be entirely our own. Are you sure, I asked, concerned about his impending wedding? It could wait until after. No, he interrupted firmly. No more secrets, no more manipulation. If we're going to start our life together, it needs to be with complete honesty. As we parted outside the cafe, Connor surprised me with an awkward but genuine hug. Thank you, he whispered, for caring enough to tell me the truth. I watched him walk away, his shoulders set with determination I hadn't seen before. Whether my revelation would postpone the wedding, alter its meaning, or change nothing remained to be seen. But for the first time, Connor was making a truly informed choice about his own life. The day of the rehearsal dinner arrived, and I prepared with unusual care. My dress was elegant but understated, a deep emerald that complemented my eyes without drawing undue attention. David looked handsome in his tailored suit, his steady presence beside me, a source of strength as we drove to Newport. The historic mansion was even more impressive in person than in the photos I had seen, its stone facade and manicured grounds exuding old-world luxury. Valets whisked away our car as we approached the entrance, where staff checked our names against the guest list. I half expected some last-minute exclusion, but we were ushered inside without incident. The grand ballroom had been transformed for the occasion, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over elegantly set tables. Floral arrangements in white and gold adorned every surface, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. It was exactly the kind of tasteful excess my mother prized. She spotted us almost immediately, making her way through the gathering crowd with my father close behind. Her smile was fixed, her eyes wary as she air-kissed my cheek. "Savannah, David," she greeted us with practiced warmth. "So glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, with equal politeness. "Everything looks beautiful." My father nodded stiffly. "The ceremony tomorrow will be even more impressive." The Anderson family spared no expense. The subtext was clear. This display of wealth and status was the culmination of his carefully orchestrated plan, the merger of two powerful families, both socially and professionally. Before I could respond, Connor appeared at my elbow. "Sav David," he said, his smile more genuine than our parents'. "Thanks for coming. There's someone I want you to meet properly." He led us away toward a stunning woman in a silver dress, Melissa, his bride-to-be. I had met her briefly at previous family functions, but our interactions had been superficial at best. Now, as she turned to greet us, I was struck by a new warmth in her expression. "Savannah," she said, taking both my hands in hers. "I'm so glad you're here. Connor's been telling me how important it is to him that you're part of our celebration." I glanced at my brother questioningly. He gave a slight nod, communicating volumes in that small gesture. He had talked to Melissa about what I had revealed, and rather than destroying their relationship, it had somehow strengthened it. They were facing my parents' manipulation together. As dinner progressed, I observed subtle but significant shifts in dynamics around the table. Connor and Melissa sat close together occasionally, exchanging glances that spoke of a new complicity. My parents, seated at the head of the table, maintained their perfect facade, but I could see tension in the set of my father's shoulders as he prepared for his big announcement. When the dessert plates were cleared, he stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted as he began his carefully rehearsed speech about family legacy, the joining of two distinguished lineages, and the exciting future ahead. I listened with new ears, hearing the calculated ambition behind every word of supposed sentiment. And so he concluded, raising his glass. "I am pleased to announce that effective next month, Mitchell Legal Group and Anderson Holdings will merge to form Mitchell Anderson Partners, one of the largest private legal firms on the East Coast." Applause rippled through the room just as he had planned. My mother beamed her social triumph complete, but then Connor stood glass in hand, and the room quieted again. "I'd also like to say a few words," he began, his voice steady despite what I knew must be significant nerves, "about family truth and new beginnings." My parents exchanged confused glances. This was not part of the script. "Melissa and I are grateful to be surrounded by those we love tonight," Connor continued. "But recent events have helped us realize that love must be built on honesty, not convenience or advantage." My father half rose from his seat, a warning in his eyes, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Tomorrow, when we exchange vows," Connor went on, "we will do so as two people who have chosen each other freely and with full awareness, not as representatives of family interests or business mergers." A murmur ran through the assembled guests. My father's face had gone pale while my mother maintained her smile through what appeared to be sheer force of will. And we've made another decision, Connor added, looking directly at me. We've asked Savannah to be part of our wedding party. Not just as a guest, but as my sister and Melissa's new sister. Because family isn't about strategic alliances, it's about love, support, and truth. The room erupted in applause again, though I noticed several guests exchanging confused looks. I felt tears pricking at my eyes as Connor raised his glass in my direction. It wasn't a public exposure of our parents' manipulation as I had threatened, but something more powerful, a quiet reclamation of his own narrative and an acknowledgement of my place in his life. Later, as the evening wound down, my father cornered me near the terrace doors. "What did you tell him?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "The truth," I said simply. "Something this family has been sorely lacking." He studied me for a long moment, conflict evident in his expression. "You could have destroyed everything tonight." "That was never my goal," I replied. "I just wanted us all to stop pretending." To my surprise, his expression softened slightly. "You're formidable, Savannah. I've underestimated you your entire life." It wasn't an apology, but coming from Richard Mitchell, it was perhaps as close as I would ever get to one. The next day, as Connor and Melissa exchanged vows beneath an arch of white roses, I stood nearby in the emerald green bridesmaid dress that had been delivered to my hotel room that morning. My parents watched from the front row, their expressions a complex mixture of pride, resignation, and calculated adjustment to this unexpected turn of events. When Connor kissed his bride, it wasn't the culmination of my parents' social engineering that we were witnessing. It was the beginning of something new, something chosen. And as I caught my brother's eye during the recessional, the smile we shared contained the promise of a different kind of family connection moving forward. One built on truth rather than appearance, on choice rather than obligation. 6 months after Connor and Melissa's wedding, I sat in Grandma Rose's sunroom, watching as she poured tea with the same precise movements she had performed all my life. At 86, she remained sharp as ever, though her hands now trembled slightly with the effort. So she said, settling back in her wicker chair, "Tell me how things stand with the family now." I smiled, accepting the delicate teacup. Different. Not perfect, but different. The changes had begun immediately after the wedding. Connor and Melissa had postponed their honeymoon instead, requesting a family meeting at Grandma Rose's house the following weekend. My parents had arrived looking wary, clearly expecting more confrontation. Instead, they found Connor and Melissa prepared with a proposal, a restructuring of both families' business interests that would maintain the advantages of collaboration while ensuring more transparent governance. "We're still willing to move forward with the merger," Connor had explained, spreading documents across the dining room table. "But on our terms, not as figureheads in your chess game." My father had started to object, then caught himself, perhaps remembering the trust assessment looming on the horizon. He had reviewed the proposals with grudging respect, eventually conceding that the plan had merit. As for my relationship with my parents, it remained complicated but evolving. My mother had made tentative overtures inviting David and me to smaller family gatherings, making visible efforts to engage with my work and interests. My father was less demonstrative, but I had caught him watching me thoughtfully across the dinner table at our monthly family meals, as if seeing me properly for the first time. "And the trust?" Grandma Rose asked, interrupting my thoughts. "Harold tells me the assessment is complete." I nodded. "It is." The trustees found overwhelmingly in favor of unequal treatment as we expected, so half the family fortune is now legally yours, she stated, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Technically, yes," I agreed, but Connor and I have reached our own arrangement about that. After much discussion, we had decided to establish a foundation dedicated to educational equity and environmental sustainability, combining our respective passions. The foundation would receive the bulk of my portion of the inheritance, with governance shared equally between us. It was our way of transforming our parents' legacy of favoritism into something positive and forward-looking. "I think your grandfather would approve, Grandma Rose," said her eyes misting slightly. "He never intended the trust to divide the family only to ensure fairness. In a roundabout way, it did exactly that," I observed. "Not by giving me money, but by giving me the leverage to demand truth and acknowledgement." As the afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting patterns across the polished wood floor, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain of exclusion had led to revelation, confrontation, and ultimately a fragile new beginning for all of us. The old wounds hadn't disappeared. They had been acknowledged, examined, and were now slowly healing. "You know," Grandma Rose said, setting down her teacup, "families are strange, imperfect things. They can harm us deeply, yet we keep trying to make them work. Because when they do work, even partially, there's nothing quite like it." I replied, thinking of Connor's unexpected hug the night before the wedding, the tentative reaching across years of distance. I would never have the perfect family of childhood dreams. My parents would never fully understand me or unconditionally celebrate my choices. But in pushing back against their manipulation, in refusing to accept exclusion and invisibility, I had created space for something more authentic, a family based on choice and truth rather than obligation and appearance. And in that space, unexpected connections were forming. Connor and I spoke weekly now, building the sibling relationship we had never properly had. David and Melissa had discovered a shared interest in medical ethics, leading to animated discussions at family dinners. Even my parents were slowly, awkwardly learning to relate to us as adults with our own agency rather than as extensions of their ambitions. "So," Grandma Rose asked with a knowing smile, "was it worth it standing up to them the way you did?" I thought about the wedding invitation that had arrived with that cruel note, the shock and pain it had caused, and the chain of events it had set in motion. "Absolutely," I answered without hesitation. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done and the most necessary." As the afternoon faded toward evening, I helped Grandma Rose clear the tea, things grateful for her wisdom and courage in showing me the truth when I needed it most. The family I had now wasn't perfect or whole, but it was real in a way it had never been before. And that reality, however complicated, was infinitely more valuable than the perfect facade we had maintained for so long. What's your story of family justice? Has karma ever circled back in your family dynamics, or have you had to create your own closure like I did? Share your experiences in the comments below. I've found such healing in this community. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and hit that like button if this resonated with you. Thank you so much for being part of my healing journey. Remember, sometimes the most painful exclusions lead to the most powerful transformations.